So in most embassies, you'll have a senior political officer and a senior economic officer. And in some ways it represents two particularly powerful components of U.S. policy and U.S. influence and power. And that's what this panel represents. So panel 2, Diplomacy and Economic Statecraft. And our moderator, I'm proud to introduce Michael Anderson, Professor of Instruction and Director of the International Relations and Global Studies program here at the University of Texas at Austin. So many of Michael's students are also Clements Center and Strauss students, and so we're very happy that he volunteered to lead this panel. Thank you, Mike.
Thank you, Paul, and thanks to all of you for being here. Am I coming through? All right, wonderful. It's a pleasure and honor to be the moderator of this panel. I was reminded just yesterday by a colleague just how recent it is that economic statecraft as a concept has really come to be discussed in the way that we have. And in scholarly circles, of course, economic diplomacy has been long used, but as a study. But clearly, it is a critical component now of any discussion of foreign policy making, security studies. It appeared as the cover article in Foreign Affairs in September, October, and so here we are. I'm delighted to be joined by 4 panelists with experience in government, private sector, and academia to help us through this moment. There are many of us here, so I'm going to try to give some brief introductions and then kind of set the rules of the road. So let's see, our panelist at the end of the row here is Him Das, a senior legal and policy expert specializing in economic security, sanctions, and international finance. He helps clients navigate the complex intersection of national security, trade, and financial regulation. He most recently served as the acting director of Financial Crimes and Enforcement Network, where he led reforms to U.S. anti-money laundering and counter-terrorism. He has held positions at the White House and the National Security Council, National Economic Council, where he served as senior director for international trade and investment and as deputy legal advisor. Simone Ledeen, a very accomplished national security professional with expertise spanning defense policy, intelligence, counter-terrorism, counter-threat finance, and emerging technologies. She was the Deputy Assistant Secretary of Defense for Middle East Policy, responsible for U.S. defense policy across the region, strengthening key U.S. defense relationships through close work with foreign counterparts, overseeing the development and implementation of critical policies and initiatives, including in counterterrorism, information operations, cybersecurity, and emerging technologies. Vince Trovato, the CEO of Global Strategies and an international business consultant with a focus on geopolitical and energy issues. His accomplishments include serving as senior advisor in international affairs for the U.S. Department of Energy. During this time, he served on the boards of both Power Africa and Prosper Africa, dedicating to increasing energy on the continent and two-way trade and investment between the U.S. and Africa. And his efforts have aided the U.S. in becoming a net energy exporter for the first time in nearly 50 years. We'll talk more about that soon. And finally, Ambassador David Litt, who served for 34 years as a career U.S. diplomat specializing in the Middle East and Southwest Asia. 2005-2006, he was the third ranking officer at the U.S. Embassy in Baghdad with the title of Political Military Counselor, providing policy advice to the U.S. ambassador and serving as a liaison between the embassy and the multinational forces. Since his retirement in 2008, he has served as the executive director of the Center for Stabilization and Economic Reconstruction. All right, both important themes for us today here. The center designs, organizes, and runs professional education programs for organizational cultures that operate in crisis environments. So we have a great panel here for us. What I want to do, since we are a big group, I'm going to try to lob out some large overarching questions. One of the panelists will take the lead, but I hope we can just generate more of a conversation. My job will be to step aside and watch the clock and just keep us on time, with the idea as well of saving time for Q&A at the end. All right, so I thought we could begin with a subject brought up by our two opening speakers. Both Secretary Gates and Coercion mentioned great power competition, especially with China. Both were rather bullish on the idea of a competition with China, especially in the economic sector. And yet, Secretary of State Marco Rubio this past June noted that our industrial capability is deeply dependent on a number of potential adversary nation states, including China, who can hold it over our head. That is this phrase we have heard of weaponized interdependence we've been talking about. So I want to ask, well, how should we conceive of economic statecraft today, right? Is this a competition that we can win, or because of interdependence, do we need to reframe this entire way of thinking about it? All right, so this is quite big. We're going to kind of get things started. Simone, Ledeen, if you could get us started, and I'm curious to know how economic statecraft features as a component of defense policy, if at all, and how that works within the Pentagon and in your thinking.
Well, thank you very much, and it's great to be here with all of you today. Hard to, the previous panelists, really a hard act to follow, but let's give it a go. So this concept of weaponized interdependence is an important one, because we are right now dependent on our largest strategic adversary for some critical things in our own defense industrial base. I have some statistics here. China right now owns 60% of global mining and 90% of global processing capacity for rare earths. In 2024, we were 100% import reliant for 11 mineral commodities, where China is the dominant player. There are a lot of statistics like this, but I think it's instructive for us to pay attention to this, since we're now in this big effort to, I don't know if you've heard this big call for reindustrialization, reshoring of a lot of our defense industrial base, manufacturing capability. That's great. But without these key materials that we need to actually make some of these advanced components, we're not really going to get very far. So here's my admittedly very broad stab at answering that excellent question that you posed. So our goal should be, and I think Secretary Gates discussed this in a very clear way, we have to stay embedded in global networks. We can't completely remove ourselves. It's not realistic. But there are two important things that we can do. Number one, we must rely on our allies to own these nodes in these big networks that are not substitutable, i.e. we must have certain components to make our own stuff. So if we don't have that, these rare earth materials, for example, we have partners, we have non-strategic competitors that we can work with to get those things. Number two, no single adversary should be able to hold a critical choke point over us. That's probably more important. So how do we get there? I think maybe there are four or so ways that we could think about doing that. Number one, start with triage. What are the most important things that we must have access to? This is like back of the envelope sort of thinking for me, but magnet rare earths. We need those for aerospace stuff. Grid components, self-evident. Highest end chips. We must have those. Those are, if we're triaging, those are the things we must have. These are no-fail systems. Then what do? Design for redundancy. That means we have multiple trusted supply chains, multiple trusted supply lines, rather. And we're also focused On stockpiles, we're not doing that yet. We have to stockpile a lot of this stuff. We need long-term contracts in order to do that. I hope that's something the current administration is focused on. Then we need to protect our own hubs. We are still important hubs globally, an important hub globally for advanced semiconductors, for key software stacks, for the dollar system, and segments of the space and biotech markets. And then finally, something that I'm not seeing yet, which is incredibly important, is matching time horizons. You know, on the military side, the Indo-PACOM, the military folks who are looking forward to when might China try to invade Taiwan, for example, if it ever does. What's the time horizon for that? The things that we're doing with industrial policy, with like financing projects from Exim, with our planning, our joint planning with our allies, all of those timelines need to match each other. And right now they don't. And so I could keep talking, but I will stop there.
Him, would you like to?
Yeah, I can add to that. You answered the question perfectly in terms of the range of tools and the approaches that we need to take. I think the key focus is on a set of restrictive measures that ensure that we protect our technologies and promote our technologies domestically, combined with positive tools, as you articulated, in terms of ensuring that we invest in the development of some of these critical technologies, critical mineral supply, et cetera, but also work very closely with our partners in terms of identifying sources for critical minerals, for technology. We're not an island. We are removed from other continents, but we're not an island in terms of our ability to produce everything that's necessary for our national security. So it is important to work with alliances and partners to be able to ensure that we have a framework for ensuring supply in case of threat and action.
I'm going to jump in really quick. Simone, you brought up Exim, and I think that that's a really good place to start. I think that oftentimes our business owners and some of our medium and small businesses here in the US don't understand the opportunities that come with entities like Exim and the DFC, and I think that we could do more to encourage those entities. They're very good tools, I think, in our diplomatic tool chest that aren't necessarily being taken full advantage of right now as well.
I would add, too, that the economic landscape that we're operating in is a dynamic one. Who heard of or even cared about rare earths 18 months ago or 2 years ago? I remember cobalt was the big mineral that was going to cause blockages, the lack of access to cobalt. So it's a dynamic playing field. And therefore, the more the United States has its eyes and ears open around the world for these new changes, this dynamics, I would argue that this is exactly the role of our diplomatic services around the world in our embassies, whose primary interest is looking out for things for U.S. public interest. Now, we also have U.S. corporations doing that. We have think tanks, centers like this, but you may have other motivations and other drives. Our diplomatic corps is looking out for those signs and those developments and then pursuing them a little further for the purpose of American public interest.
All right, well, let's kind of move into more kind of, may say, recent developments and get to the current administration and some policies that have been put forward. President Trump has invoked the International Emergency Economic Powers Act, or the IEEPA, in order to take unprecedented measures, especially on tariffs, to address emergencies. Now, this is a controversial move, and one of our panelists, wrote an excellent piece back in September in Just Security that outlines a bit about what Trump was thinking, and I would love for him to maybe kind of give us a précis of that piece and to talk about some of the broader implications. But I think that for us, here, it's worth asking, who gets to set economic policy when it comes to emergencies like this? Does this rise to economic statecraft? That term, is that more dignified than what we're even seeing today? And what some of the implications are. So, Him, would you like to get us started?
Yeah,
on this?
absolutely. And thanks for that shout out to the article. We have a cuddly name for the International Emergency Economic Powers Act. It's IEPA, and I'll call it that. But it is sort of a forefront in the conversation. I think I'll take a couple of steps back, first of all, in terms of how we got to where we are. Historically, the way we approached trade agreements and trade policy in the United States, and the way we approached economic measures related to national security were distinct. And there were two different lanes, and agencies approached, US government agencies approached economic measures and trade measures a little bit separate. I mean, national security measures and trade measures in distinct lanes. It was mostly done in terms of ensuring that there were a stable, predictable environment for economic efforts and an economic environment for businesses in the United States and their relations and ability to operate internationally, with narrow exceptions. There were exceptions to be able to combat unfair trade practices under Section 301 of the ability to address national security impacts with respect to significant sensitive sectors under Section 232, and the way to level the playing field under measures called anti-dumping and countervailing duties. The national security toolkit was a little bit different, and it was very focused on national security measures specifically in a narrow way. They involved export controls to be able to ensure that items that were produced here in the United States for dual use purposes were not exported to foreign adversaries like China, Russia, other countries as well. There is an investment security regime called the Committee on Foreign Investment in the United States that reviews transactions, investments into the United States by foreign investors, and it reviews those transactions for national security purposes, and then it mitigates any national security concerns or considerations. And then there are sanctions under IEPA authority as well against a range of actors, against Russia, against Iran, against Cuba, and other countries as well. So there were two distinct lanes. And as a government lawyer and policymaker, I spent countless hours in small rooms with people ensuring that the measures that were imposed under the national security basket were specifically those focused on national security and were not done for economic reasons more generally, while at the same time, as a trade negotiator, I would make sure that there was a very narrow carve-out for national security actions. What we're seeing now is a little bit different. The approaches are becoming conflated. The president has articulated very clearly that trade and economic policy is national security in nature, and there's an overlap between economic security, economic objectives, and national security goals, and that there's a focus on tariffs. And why a focus on tariffs? Well, first of all, there's foreign policy leverage that comes from the imposition of tariffs because countries depend on the US market. It raises revenue, and it can motivate, potentially, the onshoring of manufacturing into the United States. And I think that all of those are reasons that have been articulated in terms of the use of IEPA authority. And, ultimately, one of the big questions is, are they mutually consistent or inconsistent objectives? And why is the administration using IEPA is really an interesting question as well. It's easy to implement. It's a flexible tool. Congress has primarily acquiesced in the use of IEPA authority. They're not in a position to challenge the president, and the courts have been relatively reluctant to evaluate presidential actions in the area of foreign policy and national security. And that brings us to the litigation that's ongoing in the Supreme Court right now in terms of thinking through whether or not the president's use of IEPA authorities are appropriate. One of the questions is a core one, whether or not IEPA allows for the imposition of tariffs The statute does not use the word tariffs. It doesn't use the word taxes or duties. It says regulate the importation into the United States. And one of the big questions is just a statutory question as to whether or not regulate importation includes tariffs. And that's part of the discussion. A second part of it is whether or not the president's declaration of a national emergency in these circumstances is an appropriate declaration of a national emergency. And that's sort of a key question here, as well as can the courts evaluate whether or not the declaration of a national emergency with respect to the use of tariffs is appropriate. There have been a number of different reasons. One has been to address fentanyl imports into the United States. Another is to impose reciprocal tariffs on other countries. And there have been other reasons as well that have been invoked in various executive orders. And I think there's a key question there as to whether or not the courts can intervene and make a determination and assess whether or not a national emergency declaration by the president is an appropriate declaration. What are the rules of the road for determining whether one action is appropriate versus another one? And how are the courts expected to evaluate that?
And do you see the courts stepping in and saying something on this, or do you think that they're going to punt to Congress, and will Congress do anything about it? What's the road forward?
I don't know. I think actually, after the Supreme Court arguments a couple of weeks ago, I think the prediction markets were at about a 40% chance that the courts would affirm the president's invocation of IEEPA to impose tariffs. After the arguments, they dropped to about 25%. I think actually the odds are a little bit more even in this case. I think that one threshold question is whether or not tariffs are an appropriate term to read into IEEPA authority, and I think that that's going to be sort of the key element as part of the discussion. I think the courts are going to be a little bit reluctant to constrain the executive branch's authorities with respect to the national security and foreign policy domain, but that's sort of the critical piece. If they get past that, then it becomes very difficult for the courts to say, you know what, the president's use of IEEPA to impose tariffs to prevent fentanyl imports from Mexico is appropriate, but the invocation of IEEPA authority to address the trade deficit and address reciprocal tariffs is inappropriate. And what are the justiciable principles between the two? So I think it gets very murky. I think ultimately it could be that they reject the tariffs outright, they affirm the tariffs outright, and then there's sort of a muddy, murky gray area in between where they could say, you know what, these tariffs are not permissible, but we're not foreclosing the possibility, and then it becomes very complicated.
Yeah. Well, what do the others think about this assertion? So the president said that economic security is national security, right? Conflating the two. And so what are some of the potential concerns or implications that you see in this?
Well, I would just throw out that it is true that economic security is part of our national security. I don't think there's any question about that. The issue is the use of an economic sanction is a coercive tool. And it's a coercive tool because it inflicts pain on your counterpart. It may not even be your adversary, maybe your ally. But when you inflict pain, you have to be prepared to, A, accept the consequences of being seen to inflict pain. And especially if it's against your ally, then you weigh the benefits of that consequence. Is it in your interest? Now, are you really protecting your economic security? And then secondly, there are many times when that economic sanction, that coercive tool, needs to be in coordination with many, many other countries who all have the same target audience. And when all of you contribute together to the coercion of that tool, it's much more effective. And I'm not sure that we're employing the coercive tool in the correct way.
I would argue that I'm not a fan of tariffs, but I would also say that tariffs may be being used as a tool, as a disruptive tool in some ways, but as something that can pause things to give us some time to look at where our bilateral relationships stand with a number of countries. And I think that at the end of the day, it is one of many tools that are kind of in our tool chest that we can use to sort of reset things. And I do think that there needs to be an emphasis at times on fair trade as well, so you're not always seeing the same tariff rates between countries as well. So I think that that might be the logic of the White House at this point.
I just want to throw out one more point. Economic sanctions also can have an element of political sanction, of political isolation. It's been argued that the sanctions imposed against Libya, against Muammar Gaddafi in 25 years, a long time ago, that not only did they impose an economic sanction against Libya, which he said, oh, fine, but it imposed a political isolation for him. That he could not tolerate. And that was more along the lines of helping to motivate him to conform more to the international behavior that the international community expected.
I would just say we're really in a unique situation at this point where our largest trading partner is also our most important strategic adversary. And so I would posit to anyone here, what's your solution to deal with that? I mean, it's a pretty unique scenario. So I'm sure that the executive kind of looked across the laws that were on the books and maybe decided this was, I'm speaking as a non-lawyer myself, I must say, that perhaps this made sense. And obviously, we're dealing with an administration, like a president who wrote The Art of the Deal. So that obviously comes into play as well. I mean, if you want to impose pain, as the ambassador noted, obviously tariffs are a really good way to do that. We can debate the merit of them separately, but I think that given this very unique situation that we find ourselves in, it's a unique tool that they've chosen to use, and I don't know, a Congress that actually operated effectively might consider writing a new law, given our, it's 2025 and the world has changed, but I don't know, maybe hoping for a little too much, I don't know.
Yeah, well said.
To follow up on Vincent's point about what tariffs are just a natural use of economic policy. I wonder if we could kind of say a bit more about the relationship between tariffs and sanctions. Is this just a matter of degree, or should we be thinking of these as separate categories here? I would love to kind of just probe this a little bit more, just so that the audience can maybe think about. Are tariffs just another way to sanction economies? Is this standard practice, or is this something that's new?
Generally tariffs are, economic sanctions have been long used by the United States. They are often either embargoes, they are financial sanctions, for example, blocking the assets of a terrorist, or prohibiting financial transactions with countries like Syria or Iran or other countries, or Libya as well. And they've been targeted in nature. The impact on the U.S. economy is limited in nature because they are primarily directed at the other country in terms of preventing that other country from being able to engage in financial transactions with the United States more generally. And it is essentially sort of a tool of leverage with respect to that country that is ultimately the subject of sanctions. I think the salient difference between, there are a number of salient differences between the use of tariffs and financial sanctions as they've been historically used, but there is a key component to it that's similar, right, which is an exercise of leverage with respect to the other country to persuade the other country to change their behavior in some way or the other, or to deny the other country of a certain degree of resources that it might otherwise be able to get. So there is a commonality between the two. I think the big difference between tariffs and financial sanctions is essentially that tariffs have an impact on the U.S. economy, and that's a significant impact. I've worked with a lot of companies over the last 2 or 3 months that have been significantly impacted by tariffs, and the ability to source goods that they have used their own ingenuity and creativity to develop here in the United States, and then they source goods from India, China, Vietnam, other countries, Mexico as well, and they've faced an incredibly unpredictable and uncertain environment with respect to tariffs, and they've been working incredibly hard to be able to think through how to be able to maintain stable prices on the goods that they're selling here in the United States and how to absorb that impact for the goods. And I think that that is having an impact on the U.S. economy itself over time, and we'll learn a little bit more over the coming months and the years in terms of what that impact looks like. But it certainly had a real impact on the U.S. economy.
Anyone else want to?
I just think that that other countries' trade practices vis-a-vis the United States also could have, significant impact on our economy, and so a counter argument to that might be, evening things out where we've been paying outsized tariffs given what other countries might enjoy from us economically. So.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, and I will also just say, too, I don't know that the goal of entering into negotiation is necessarily fairness, per se. I think it's to achieve some sort of upper hand in a negotiation. You want a good deal for all, but at the end of the day, you are trying to gain some sort of an advantage if you're in any bilateral negotiation, I think.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Well, Vince, as promised, we're going to talk about energy and energy independence, sovereignty, security, more terms to try to sort through.
Right.
But we know, thanks to your efforts and others, the U.S. is a net exporter of energy. Now it has been, for 6 years now, I suppose? And so what different position does that put the United States in vis-a-vis economic statecraft and kind of possibilities moving forward? If you could get us started on that.
Yeah, of course. I think that our position is improved. It's still very complicated. Just because we are now a net energy exporter does not mean that we truly have energy security per se. And I think it's actually wise to talk a little bit about some of the elements of energy security itself and kind of some agreed terms. I mean, one is you have a diversification of sources. You have resilience in the face of disruptions. You have steady supply chains. You have well-functioning markets. And you have continued technological advancements that are being made in that sector. And I think that we are, on the pro side, I think that what's exciting right now about the U.S. energy space is that we are checking those 5 criteria to be prosperous, to have energy security to a point. That being said, as we heard starting this morning from Secretary Gates and throughout the day here today, there are threats to all 5, I think, of those criteria. And this has been a short-term win for us, meaning that the last 6 years, it's been excellent that we've been an energy exporter. That being said, between the Eisenhower administration and whatever it was, 2019, we were not. And it has been a longstanding goal of presidents between Richard Nixon and Donald Trump to make sure that we got across that finish line to become an exporter, to, I think, open up the possibility of a greater and more enhanced energy security to open up. So again, while I think that we're making improvements, and I think that all of those criteria are being satisfied, I think that you can point to some direct threats. We are still importing crude. We are still subject to Chinese hackers, which I think could be very disruptive. We still have supply chains that can be interrupted by conflict, and we've seen this in other parts of the world. Fortunately, it has not happened as much in the United States, but that possibility is always there, and we've seen that even with close allies in the past few years, who I think that we would have been surprised 5 years ago if we had heard that Germany, for instance, might be having some of these issues. And then you see them have to reverse course from Nord Stream 2 very quickly after the Russian incursion into Ukraine several years ago. So it's not necessarily a static thing. It's a very complex, it's a very diverse set of circumstances that lead to energy security. And again, my answer is yes, we are on the road to energy security. We are more secure now than we have been in a long time, but we're not fully there yet. We need to remain very vigilant. And I think that at the end of the day, I think that the difference is going to come down to our ability to harness the fifth criteria, which is our continued technological advancements. When I was at DOE, one of my jobs was to help set up an office called Energy Innovation and Market Development. In that office, we really strove to work with our best innovators, our best minds, to utilize the technology that Americans have always been producing throughout the course of our history. And I think that we're going to continue to have to do that in order to exceed what the Chinese are doing right now.
I mean, others, is this a game changer when it comes to economic statecraft? Do you think energy independence or at least exporting energy, or I don't know, what are your thoughts?
I welcome the United States' ability to diversify its sources of energy across the board, to include legacy sources of energy, and also those that are cutting-edge technologies, and not just wind and solar, but often way into the future, for us to make the kinds of investments in research and development for these kinds of technologies that will put the United States arguably the most dynamic and powerful economic engine for this kind of new knowledge, that we can lead the world rather than follow the world and follow others. Don't think we should be in that position either.
I agree with Ambassador Litt on this one. I think that diversified energy sources and the ability of the United States to lead on a broad range of energy sources is absolutely fundamental. Won't get into the issue about the net energy export, but around renewables as well. The United States has the ability to lead with respect to renewables around wind power, around solar technology. And you look at economic diplomacy around the world, and countries are adopting significantly solar power and wind energy and leapfrogging past legacy energy as well. And it's incredibly important for the United States to innovate and to lead in all sort of aspects of energy resource development, because ultimately our economic diplomacy in other countries will lean on all aspects of our ability to support energy development and energy implementation in other countries as well.
I think too, to your point, just really quick, is to talk about that diversity of energy sources. I think is absolutely essential. I think we sometimes have had unfair expectations of certain countries, and I do quite a bit of work in Africa, so I'm talking about Africa specifically here. And my work on the board for the Africa Energy Chamber has led me to have some interesting conversations on the continent that it seems like sometimes we have unfair expectations of their being able to jump 30 to 40 years ahead of where they currently are, technologically speaking, in the energy space. And I think that we, by being diverse, can bring a lot of different solutions to the table at the same time. I think we have to be able to be flexible enough to be both adept in the short term and the long term as well. And I think that's where we often get kind of caught sometimes in sort of having a very idealistic policy that is very good, and we all want to get there, but it's something that we can't just jump to tomorrow either.
Yeah, absolutely. I agree with that. I mean, I think that it's important to take a pragmatic approach towards our engagement with any country on any policy whatsoever. And you pointed to sort of the toolkit around DFC and XM earlier. I think that's an incredibly important piece of it. I think that one of the challenges that the United States has with respect to economic diplomacy vis-a-vis, say, China, is that we don't have a single unified sort of government-focused ability to motivate capital in third countries. When we do need to sort of motivate a tool of economic diplomacy with respect to a particular country, it requires a number of agencies all working together to be able to focus resources with respect to a country, and then you have to bring the private sector to bear as well along with all of that, because that's where the capital lies in the first place. And so, particularly in Africa, it's incredibly important to bring USTDA, the U.S. Trade and Development Agency, together with DFC, together with XM, and then partner with the private sector to be able to deliver a overall set of investments for third countries. And it's important regardless of what the sector is with respect to development, infrastructure development, energy development, et cetera.
So, what you're saying is we can't just show up with bags of cash like the Chinese do.
No, we need a little bit of
And there's
coordination.
also,
Just to be
there's
clear,
also
we're part
an
of a
aspect-
rules-based order, right?
we cannot focus exclusively on sources of energy either. But in fact, to our detriment, we ignore things like our electric grid. How secure is that?
Right.
How fragile is that across borders? Europe has been wrestling with that certainly over the last year or so, when you see electricity spikes and problems going across borders, causing issues. So it's not just the source of electricity, but or energy, but also the delivery of energy.
All right. Well, Simone brought up in her earlier remarks the importance of allies, and I want to kind of open up now to a discussion of how best to work with allies and partners when it comes to, I guess, economic policy and statecraft. And I wanted to put diplomacy in a wider context here. I had the fortune of taking a number of undergraduate students to Paris this last summer, and we met with U.S. diplomats at both UNESCO and OECD. I don't have to tell you that our relationship with UNESCO is fraught at the time, will be non-existent soon enough. But even at OECD, you could sense the tension that there is for U.S. diplomats kind of working in these longstanding institutions. Kind of the question for us is, looking ahead, is it worthwhile to try to resuscitate these institutions, many of these multilateral organizations that the U.S. has retreated from or abandoned, groups like the WTO when it comes to trade? Should we be looking to re-strengthen the WTO moving forward, or should we be looking to create some ad hoc coalitions over the issue of trade or climate, for instance? You know, there's the UN Framework Convention on Climate Change, the other COP meetings happening now without the U.S. there. What's the best pathway forward when it comes to multilateralism and our presence in these international organizations? Ambassador Litt.
Yeah, I've been thinking about this because I don't think it's an either or. I think it's a both and. And in fact, I would say that the real paradigm that the United States needs to think about is, are we going to withdraw from this kind of robust engagement that the United States has had certainly since the end of World War II, and arguably even before that? I mean, at the end of World War I, we've created international organizations and then did not participate in them. Mm-hmm. But are we going to withdraw from that and then be susceptible to the new rules, the new norms, the new values that are created in those organizations that are not going to disappear, but rather are going to be filled? That vacuum that we leave is going to be filled by someone else, and I would argue that's likely to be China. Mm-hmm. Or do we become or remain the masters, if you will, or the people, the powers that our colleagues and from other nations respect, look up to? We have acquired over the last many decades a great deal of respect, and this is what is the consequence of soft power, as we say, the appeal of the United States, both on moral and ethical grounds, but also our economic power, our economic generosity, our economic our way of conducting ourselves has garnered a lot of respect. So in these international councils, countries look up to us. When we withdraw from that, we no longer have any kind of role in controlling where those organizations are going to go and with whom. So I would say that's not the best best strategy for the United States. Instead, I would say that we have the ability to operate at three different levels. We are, as a nation state, we operate bilaterally with our counterparts around the world. We also operate at the subnational level, whether we're talking about an NGO like World Vision or Mercy Corps, or an NGO like the Islamic State or Al-Qaeda, or other corporations, other sub-state actors, or at the suprastate level. Some supra-state organizations are less directly influential to U.S. national interest in a direct way, as you suggested, OECD. UNESCO, more so, because of UNESCO's work in education, science, and culture. I would argue that maintaining certain norms and values about what is and what should be respected in terms of education and science and culture is very much in the United States' interest. Then you go to the far end of the spectrum of an international organization like the United Nations Security Council, where what happens there is of immediate and direct interest to the United States. In fact, the United Nations in general is a very valuable organization for the United States to be there to direct the direction in which the UN goes, because when the UN comes together in certain critical areas, certain critical conflicts, the UN word is pretty much respected by the rest of the world, especially when China, Russia, France, England, and the United Kingdom and the United States all agree on something. So there is some value in that, and I would argue that a robust United States presence in the international organization arena is something that we should continue to pursue. This does not cost us a lot. We do not need a large investment in human or financial resources to do this. We do need to sustain a diplomatic presence, which was the essence of your question, of diplomacy in these areas. And that diplomatic presence is something we have had up until recently, I guess. We have had a robust diplomatic presence. If we are to sustain that, then we continue to have America's eyes and ears in economic issues and economic statecraft, those carrots and sticks for achieving our national security interests, whether it's in Paris at OECD or Embassy Paris, Brussels EU, Addis Ababa in the Africa Union, wherever it may be, our diplomats are there anyway, so they are doing the work of collecting that information. What makes a diplomat different than journalists, than corporations, than researchers and academics who pursue these issues is that diplomats relate on a different level with their counterparts in other countries, whether governments, civil society, corporations, labor unions, other influencers and opinion makers. We tend to acquire credible, accurate information that is often given to us and only us on a confidential basis because our counterparts know that the information they're giving to us is going to be kept confidential, but is going to be used for the purpose of helping to create America's policy. And that is something that no other source of information can really acquire for the purpose of American public interest. I don't want to go too far into this, but in my career, I have engaged in lots of different examples of that.
Yep.
So.
And I would say that these multilateral organizations are certainly happy to have us back whenever, if we want to rejoin. It's just maybe thinking about what is the best forum for these. So yeah, briefly, yeah.
Yeah, the world that the ambassador describes, you make me a little nostalgic for the world as it was. Unfortunately, I don't think we're in that world anymore. For example, you talk about the United Nations and the respect that the United Nations has, as a global authority on things. I don't really believe that it is. I think there are a lot of people that share my view of that. You mentioned UNESCO. I would include UNESCO. I would include a bunch of other United Nations entities that are clearly operating not in the US interest, not in the interest of a number of our important partners and allies, So I think it's important that we take a step back and say, what are we getting from all of this? Now, I agree with you in the sense that it's not to our benefit necessarily to leave and to cede everything to China, which is absolutely what would happen. I agree with you. But I don't think we need to look at the world as it is today, not as we wish it were. And we're in a multipolar world now. And we need to kind of change our approach to it from a U.S. economic, we're talking about economic stuff in this panel, so I'll just focus on that. But so, that's my opinion. And this is also based on my, years of experience. I do a lot of work around the world with clients, U.S. companies that operate around the world. And the world today is not the way that it used to be. And so we must work with partners and allies. It's critically important that we do. But these global multilateral organizations are not serving us the way that they used to. And so to more directly answer your question, I think these smaller coalitions are ultimately the way to go. We need to keep our foot in these large multilateral organizations to an extent. Like the UN Security Council is, I don't want to say anything that's going to shock you, but I think it's a farce. Look around. You have Iran running like the women's, hello. It's insane. What are we doing? What are we doing? Yeah. This is not, it is unserious. So I think that a lot of these coalitions, AUKUS, for example, this directly relates to our, what do we, the United States in 2025, what do we need? Who are the most important partners? Kind of in my opening remarks, I talked a bit about the hubs. How does the U.S. remain a hub? How do we, rely on, how do we move forward in this environment where we are threatened and challenged a lot in this multilateral space, multipolar space? So it's these partners and allies. Kelly Maximin mentioned not just Australia, but Japan, Canada in some cases. These are partners with whom we need to form these smaller coalitions for discrete things, and I think we'll find a lot of success there. I know we will. I actually just came back from Israel, and I was really impressed by their. Of course, they have a global reputation for cybersecurity, but since the October 7th war, they've also been busily developing defense technology and unique capabilities that we really can benefit from. So this is another area where I think forming small coalitions to work on these discrete problems together, I think we'll find a lot of success there, and that's what I advocate for.
And I think we have that. We have the G7, we have the G20, and we work with countries within and like-minded countries who are our allies, Japan, the EU, Germany, France, Australia, and others, in terms of advancing U.S. economic objectives and U.S. economic leadership. I think that, it's interesting that, there are warts to international institutions. And you have to recognize that there are warts to international institutions in terms of the speed, the efficiency, their ability to make decisions, their ability to sort of move very quickly to respond to real national security issues and economic security issues globally, and to change the overall environment over time. And they tend to sometimes be stagnant as well. So there are issues with international institutions that I think need to be recognized. But at the same time, I think that the United States works effectively at all levels, whether it's bilaterally, as Ambassador Litt said, whether it is on a plurilateral basis through organizations like the G7 or the G20, which have advanced U.S. objectives because we are a significant player in those institutions, those groupings, not institutions, in terms of pushing countries to be able to sort of align with U.S. interests, and in international institutions. The United States plays a leadership role in the International Monetary Foundation, the IMF, and the World Bank as well, in terms of shaping development policy as well as macroeconomic policy and exchange rate policy around the world, and those institutions play an important role in disciplining exchange rate practices, improper macroeconomic objectives, and advancing U.S. development goals in a number of countries around the world. So that's an important piece of the puzzle, and the U.S. exercises significant economic leadership in those in those institutions as well. But at the same time, I do think that there is a significant amount of room for improvement around a number of organizations like the WTO, the UN, and others to ensure that they are more effective. And we should have an open approach and open eyes towards what needs to be improved in those institutions.
I think that we can all agree that there has to be some reforms of some of these international organizations. And I think part of the issue is that it's gone for so many years where we haven't really had this debate. It's been something that we've just either, tried to shy away from. And I don't think anyone wants to get back to the days of isolation. I think that we want to be in the position that we are contributing to some of these organizations. And I personally take the mindset that we need to be, we're better off in the room than outside the house, so to speak, when we're having these conversations. And I still agree with just about every one of your critiques of the UN.
No, but we agree. I never said leave, and I'm not America alone at all.
Yeah. And of course, it's both and. And I would not argue necessarily that it's the authority of the United Nations. When the United Nations comes to a full agreement, it's the legitimacy of the actions that are then taken that help countries like the United States to do what it needs to do. When it has a legitimacy conferred upon by a UN consensus, I think this is very positive. And when we operate, and we do sometimes, we have to, without that kind of UN legitimacy, number one, it makes us fight uphill for credibility, but it also gives our adversaries ammunition to challenge the superpower who's trying to impose its culture, blah, 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 on some poor, benighted other country. So there's room for everything. We should just not be withdrawing anywhere.
Which gets back to the historical legacy, too, of why they were created. And we created those institutions in the first place, which was as a tool of American foreign policy in many ways. So if we're looking back at the creation of the United Nations, at the creation of the World Bank, at the creation of the IMF, there are reasons why the United States created these institutions, and I think it does work to our national interest in many ways.
We just need to be clear-eyed about what are we getting from them today.
Right, exactly.
And exert our power where we can to get maximum benefit.
Yeah, instead of ceding authority, maybe using the authority.
Yes.
Students, I hope you all are paying close attention to how you can have constructive disagreement here on stage, right? It is possible, and and great to see, and always kind of helpful to really emphasize some of these differences. We have a few minutes remaining. I want to open up to Q&A for a few students. I see some. Young man in the tie right there in the orange.
Thank you, Dr. Anderson. For the whole panel, what role do you see more novel energy generation sources, like small modular reactors or geothermal energy, taking in the United States energy security going forward? And then what particular challenges exist right now to developing those at scale, and then also exporting them to other countries?
I'll jump on that really quick. I think that part of the issue is funding. We need to continue to fund institutions like at the Department of Energy, ARPA-E, which is the energy arm like DARPA at the Pentagon. I think that that's something that we need to continue to fund, to fully fund, and in fact to increase funding on that. As far as exporting our technology, that's a long process typically. That's not something that's just going to happen overnight, but it gets back to some of the larger conversations that we were having on trade. This is a multifaceted trading relationship that we're talking about. So it's something that, again, it's going to take quite a while, but I do think that we need to be at the cutting edge of some of these technologies, and that's again, where ARPA-E steps in.
I would, if I may, just add quickly to that. In particular, small modular reactors, something I'm really excited about and working on right now. I think that we have a number of exciting U.S. companies that are developing them, and the faster that the government can help them to conduct their necessary testing, the better, the faster we'll get those out. I know the Defense Department in particular is really excited about what they could do with those. And I think with that, this might need to be a type of technology that needs to be protected until it can be more diffuse. We need to make sure that we have it before other people, and especially our strategic adversaries, because it's very exciting technologies that allow militaries to do a lot of new things, and who do we want to be able to do that besides us?
This is why we need more physicists, engineers, scientists in the intelligence services and in the State Department.
That's right.
Standing in the back, in the green sweater. Someone.
So this is about economic statecraft. What do you say about like countries like Qatar, who are negotiating for Hamas? It doesn't really help us with our values, and they're funding with billions of dollars for our adversaries. What comments would you have for that? And how can we negate other adversaries playing economic statecraft against us?
8 seconds for the spicy question.
Looking at this clock.
The U.S. doesn't view Qatar as a strategic adversary. We have our largest military base in the Middle East is in Qatar, and we can debate the merits of that, but it's a fact. And so Qatar has very effectively positioned itself as a friend to many. And our government is engaging with them diplomatically, as the ambassador described, and we have a lot going on with them. So I'm personally sympathetic to what you said, but if you look at how our U.S. government today is managing that relationship, and we're managing relationships with many other countries who are talking to a lot of people that we wouldn't necessarily want to talk to, but we try to use that to our benefit as much as possible. But I appreciate your question, and I'm sympathetic to it.
Thank you very much. Our time has come to an end. Please join me in a round of applause for our panelists.